There we go. Now we should be live with the sound. We upgraded OBS, so it should. It's going to be a little bit odd. Yeah, please hit the like button. What's up, trusted source? Would be nice. Message retracted, but I'm sure it was a good one. It's too good, apparently. But hope you guys can hear me well. Please comment in the live chat if you can. Hello, Paulina, my wonderful wife. So please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm. I have a good stream for us today. Getting started a bit late, but it is storming like crazy here. So hopefully we don't lose power. If we do, that's what happened. But it is a crazy storm outside. We had thunder today for the first time in a long time. I live in Southern California, and I moved from Arizona, and I'm used to having thunder and lightning, and I love thunder and lightning, and that's like one of the things I miss the most is when you get rain in Southern California. It's just rain, and it's rain that lasts all day, whereas like in Arizona, it's, you know, monsoon, it pours for 30 minutes and then it's just done. But you get this crazy thunder and lightning, and it's awesome. But you don't get that here. So today I wanted to just talk about some interesting experiences. I apologize for being absent last week. We had death in the family, unfortunately, this past week, and my grandmother unfortunately passed away. It was my last grandmother, and she was in her 90s, so she was not young, but it's always hard. But it does just get me thinking about life and death, and I kind of want to talk about that. And then I also had some interesting dream experiences that I want to talk about, and just you know, what is the definition of consciousness and why I don't like to use it so much, because of its dual meaning, and we're going to talk about it a bit. But should be a good stream. One thing I do want to share is I like to share you know, hobbies and things like that on here. My wife got me blacksmithing lessons recently, and I have always wanted to do that. People say it looks like a prison shank, which that's unfortunate, but it's fine. I get it. But I built this letter opener, and works great. It's not very sharp. It's just a letter opener. It's not a knife. But you know, it's like twisted and things like that, and you can hang it. But it was quite a cool experience to, you know, forge with a hammer and you know, pliers that were also forged, and you know, to forge steel. That was a very cool experience. It's something I've always wanted to do, and I've always wanted to eventually get my own forge. But here is a video. We're going to test this out because I updated OBS. Maybe the sound will come through. If it doesn't, oh well. But let's test this. Here we go. And screen share. There we go. That worked. The sound. One of the things that I've always had to do on this channel is turn the mic towards the computer, and it kind of messes with the sound whenever I'm sharing a clip. So with this update, it seems like I don't have to do that anymore. So let me know in the chat if that worked well and the sound was clear. But definitely recommend you know, trying blacksmithing if you ever get the chance. It's a fun experience. Very hot, I will say. Like, you know, it's funny because you think like heat, like you can get close but not touch it, but like there is a level of heat where you can't even get close, and we don't experience that level of heat very much. You know, it's like when people scoop lava up and stuff, and they're like wearing full protective suits, and you're like, why are you doing that? You just, you know, scoop the lava, put it in like a water bucket or something when they're getting lava for studies and things. You can see videos of it, and but I bet you need that protective suit. Like there is a level of heat that is so hot that you can't even get close to it, and that's not something that we normally experience. But like I said, please hit the like button. It helps fuel the algorithm, and let's I guess get started on dreams. So, well, let's talk about consciousness first, because there is this word that is used all the time, obviously, consciousness, and I try and stay away from this word. I try to use the word sentience as time has gone on. There are some instances in which I still use the word consciousness because I think it works still, but the issue with it is that we use it in multiple different ways, and I've talked about this before, but it's very confusing because when people talk about consciousness, and you hear like Roger Penrose or some of his associates especially will talk about consciousness, forgot their names, they'll talk about how this, you know, anesthesia will stop consciousness, and that because of that, they can use that mechanism to study what consciousness is by studying how to stop it. I don't think that this works at all, because it doesn't really get to the heart of, like, I mean, I'm not saying it can't provide insights, but it doesn't get to the heart of what consciousness is. And, you know, people will say, well, you know, when you're asleep, you're unconscious. But this is wrong. This is not, well, it's not wrong. It's just a different use of the word consciousness. And in that use, it does matter, and it is interesting, but you have to recognize that it's not the same as meaning I'm a conscious being, okay, in the direct sense. So let's kind of get into that, because when you're dreaming, you're not unconscious. And if you're, this is hard. It depends on how you're using the word. You are still there. That's what I will say. You're still sentient. You're not, your beingness still exists. It's just operating in a different space than it normally operates in. And just to use very, you know, kind of rough metaphors, you can think about being alive and operating in this change space, this space-time space, with others as kind of Xbox Live. And I think that when you're dreaming, you're more like you're playing campaign on a game. Okay, everybody's bots almost. But I don't even know how true that is, and we're going to get into that because I had some interesting dreams. And you know, people will say things like, "Oh, well, it's your subconscious. In your dreams, it's your subconscious." I don't even know if that is the best way to describe it, because, for instance, you know, when I'm dreaming, I usually don't realize that I'm dreaming. Sometimes I realize I'm dreaming, and that's called a lucid dream, but usually I don't realize that I'm dreaming. But I do make decisions, and I am aware of my existence in my dream. Sometimes you don't remember your dreams, but I don't think that means that you don't have them. And even if you don't, and you're kind of just put on pause, like the game is just paused, that doesn't mean that you still don't exist. You know, the game can be turned on at any time, because even if you weren't dreaming, you wake up and you're still there. So it's not like you disappeared. And this has very interesting implications about the nature of being in and of itself. I'm trying not to use the word consciousness because, like I said, there's multiple meanings of it. So if consciousness means beingness, that's one thing. And if consciousness means awake in the change space, that's another thing. And you can't confuse these two meanings. So whenever you're going to have a discussion about consciousness, it's very important to first clarify which one of these two definitions you are using. You can use either one, but you have to just make sure that when you're discussing it, you're using it in a consistent manner. Otherwise, there's no point in even having the discussion. And but here's the interesting dream that I had. So I had this dream the other day, and it was like very vivid, and there was lots of things just leading up to this, and it was just a crazy dream in general. But at a certain point, there was I was with a friend. I don't know who they were, some guy, and then some girl that we knew, and neither one of these two people exists in real life. And this girl comes up to this friend and I, and tells us that shows us this rock that they had found. Okay, and they're like, "Look, I found this rock," and it was a unique looking rock. And they were like, "I don't know what kind of rock it is. Do you know what kind of rock it is?" And we were like, "I don't know what kind of rock it is. Send it to the university of, I think it was the U of A, University of Arizona, because that's where I'm from, is around there, and maybe they'll tell you what kind of rock it is." So she sends it in, and they don't know what kind of rock it is, and comes back, and she tells us, she's like, "I don't know what kind of," they don't know what kind of rock it is, but she had polished it up this time and was showing it to us, and it was beautiful. Like, it was like every color that could possibly, be seen was found in this rock. And she's like, I guess I get to name this rock, this type of, gem. And I was like, yeah. And she was like, "I want to name it after God. Like, let's name it after God." And we were like, okay, trying to think, like, all of us. And I left, and I, was trying to think of a name, and I come up with, like, I didn't like any of the things that I came up with. It was like Yahweh and like Yahweh, and then I came up with Godite, and for some reason I thought that sounded good, but I didn't like it. It was like too much, like, I don't know why we were doing this, but like, it was just such a beautiful rock that we wanted to name it after God. And I go back, and we meet, and she was going to tell me where she found this rock, and I was going to go find some myself. And when we meet up, she's like, I came up with a name, and I was like, "What is it?" And she called it Adonai, like Adonai, like the name for God, which is one of the, names for God, I guess. Names, I don't know if name is the best word for it, but one of the yeah, I guess you could say names for God, and in Hebrew, and it just sounded so good. I was like, wow, it's way better than Yahweh. And I didn't like the term Godite because it was like too much, in my opinion. But even though it sounds good, it's like too much. I don't know how else to describe it. But Adonai, like, sounds like a gem. And I remember just thinking, like, wow, that was pretty good. And I woke up, and after like finding more of these rocks and polishing them, and they were just like stunning. And but where did that come from? That's the question. Like, this was basically like an NPC almost in my dream. Some girl I don't know, like, never met in real life, and just was like talking to me about rocks, and like found some rock, and comes up with this name for it that's better than me. And what's interesting is I thought through in my dream, like the different names that I could come up with for this stone. I was thinking in my dream. I wasn't unconscious. This was not like a movie was playing. I was active. And I think that we are like this in dreams. I don't think that it's not so much like a movie as we think. I think you are making decisions. You might not feel as present because you probably aren't. You're more restricted in how things go, because it's similar to playing like campaign versus, I don't know, like Xbox Live, where multiple people are making decisions and it's influencing, the space much more so than in, campaign where you're kind of being guided towards this one, you know, um, goal, for the game, no matter what. You can turn around and do nothing, but like nothing happens. But like, kind of being guided towards this goal. Whereas in Xbox Live, you almost have to like come up with your own goal. Other than it's obviously there's like games with different goals and stuff, but like, you get what I'm saying. And there's an objective to playing campaign. I don't play games that much anymore, but I used to when I was younger. And there's nothing wrong with playing video games. I just have different hobbies, but like I definitely understand why people like playing video games. But it's and I would imagine it's not that different from when I used to play a lot more. And but this creative name that came out of this dream didn't come from me, but there was names that I had come up with. They just weren't very good. But then there was this name that was very good that comes out of this basically NPC, which makes me think like, who is that NPC? If all there is sentience, that means that who is that NPC? People will say it's a reflection of your subconscious. But what does that even mean? Because you're not unconscious in this dream. I was conscious. I was thinking. I remember thinking logically through like, what could be the name of this? And it's gotta be, another entity. In that, even if that person in that dream doesn't exist, there's a being behind that person. Kind of like, if there's an NPC in a game, there's a person who wrote the code for that NPC. Behind that NPC, there is a person. It's just not that, and that NPC is not a person. But there is a person that at some point wrote the code for that and came up with that character and that, for a reason and for a purpose. And very intentionally. It's not unintentional, and ultimately it does trace back to sentience, no matter what. But the creativity of that name, Every0ne, like that just sounds beautiful, and it just was creative in some ways. Like, where did that come from? I don't think it came from me, and because I was so impressed by it. And I didn't, it's like you think I thought about the other ones. I didn't think about that one. It was just told to me. And I was like, wow, that's really good. That's way better than mine. And it just got me thinking about what, is the nature of beingness and how, it's not this material. I mean, it's not. I don't want to say it's not this material thing, but it isn't. But it's. I'm not going to dismiss materialism as being a reality that we exist in. It's just a question of where does it come from. That's the reality. And whether or not it's fundamental. It's not fundamental, but it is an emergent perception, and that's for sure. I'm not going to deny that. But it's just interesting that you can exist in that space, and there's also others beyond you, even if that's not that, NPC character. There's someone behind it, and maybe you could say probably God. If you trace it back eventually enough, then yes, eventually it would be. But I don't know if it's direct or not, but it might be. And but you persist even when you are asleep. Asleep is a matter of perspective. It's other people looking at your body in Xbox Live, and they're like, "Oh, he's idle." You know, he's playing a different game, and thought that was super interesting, and it made me think about consciousness and quite a bit. And let me know in the chat whether or not you think that's interesting at all. But also, I see 3 people watching and 2 likes, so please hit the like button if you found that interesting. It helps fuel the algorithm. But it gets me thinking about life and death too, because if you're still there when you're asleep, then you're, like, what happens when you die, basically, and what is death and what is life. And I've talked about this stuff before, but I kind of just want to touch on it more because recently had a death in the family, and it just got me thinking. And if you're here intentionally, because every single partition of sentience goes against the nature of existence, or God, which is oneness of sentience, then that means that it's intentional and there's a purpose to it, and it's generating information. And I'm not saying that everybody. This is tough because I don't know for sure, but all I will say is that if you do exist, that when you die, you most likely, the default would be that your consciousness continues to exist, or your sentience, your beingness, still persists. And the reason for this would be because you are the context of all the information that has been generated by you. Almost all of it. There's like observations that others have of someone's life, but the majority of the information that is generated by you is in the context of you. It's your information, not the information that is kind of influenced by you, that is perceived by others, if that makes any sense. And if you eliminate you, then you eliminate the context of all the information that you have accumulated, or that has been accumulated, or at least most of the information. And I do believe that there are people that God could delete you. And it also could be that your file becomes so corrupted that there's no one left to give context to the information. And what do you do with the corrupted file? You delete it. But when you close a file on your computer, you save the file. And that's the default, is to save it. And otherwise, why have a file on your computer? And the desktop would be the change space, and then the hard drive would be the save space, and you save it to the hard drive. But in this case, in the context of what is fundamental, of fundamental existence, which is sentience, you are saved. Not just all this memory information, because you can't save the memory information really without saving it in context, because context is information, and you are the context of the information that you generate in the form of memories. So you can't keep memories really without keeping the context of memories, which means without keeping you. And so the default would be that you are saved. Now, that means you're still aware, because that's what it means to be sentient. It means to feel. And we're going to be talking about this a bit more in the coming weeks, because there's some streams that I'm going to give some commentary on regarding it. But what is, when people say, what is the definition of I think, therefore I am? And, or what does that mean really? And thinking I think that I think, therefore I am, it's pretty self-explanatory, but it's also and I would say that it's true. But even more fundamentally than that is I feel, therefore I am. And because thinking has multiple definitions to us. That's the reason why I say that. Whereas feeling, it's so intuitively understood what it means to feel versus what it means to think. Because of computers, we think about like, is ChatGPT thinking, or like, is your Excel file thinking, is your MacBook Pro thinking, like, what does it mean to think? Is it just processing information? Well, your cell phone does that, and so I would say thinking is not just processing information, but it's different than that. But I mean, it is processing information. The question is really, is your cell phone processing information? If the answer is yes, then on its own, absent anyone else, then that says one thing. But I would say that that's an incorrect definition of thinking, or it's not the best definition of thinking. There's you could go with it, but it would change all these other connections that you'd have to make to the word. But because information is context, and so absent an observer and someone with intentions, there is no information. Like an Excel file, without me observing it and interpreting it and knowing what it meant, there is no information anymore, because it doesn't inform anyone. That's what information does. It informs someone. Okay? It's not just this random bits. It informs. That's what information is. And so you can't, and so you're the processor of it in a way, because even though you have this like tool that you're using to help you, it's to help you process the information. It's not really the computer that's doing the processing. But I just thought that, it's something that we don't think enough about this stuff, because it's funny, because there's this channel that we're gonna talk about a bit more, Alex something, I forgot his name right now, but he is a philosopher, and he's actually brilliant. And let's take a look. What's his name? Because I want to do this justice a little bit. I think his name is Alex. Yeah, Alex O'Connor. This guy, the Cosmic Skeptic. This guy. And in his, he has a video that's titled, it's basically like, what does that mean? I think, therefore I am. And he has a lot of different videos. This is why I don't believe in God, and God is a delusion. And he went to school for theology and philosophy. And I will say, he seems to be very genuine, and that's why we're going to talk a lot about some of his streams in the coming weeks. I like to talk about people that I think are genuine, and I also think he's genuinely very talented. I mean, it's pretty obvious to me. He's very talented, philosophically very talented. But I do think that there are some missteps that are fundamental, and those fundamental missteps cause cascading incoherence down the road of anyone. It's not just him. And, I suffered from that as well. And I've said this before, and is that if you don't see God in your life, then you have a misunderstanding of what and who God is. Because if you assume that God exists for the sake of argument, that means God is everywhere, and that means you have to see God everywhere. And and you can see God in different ways, but you would see God in logic itself. And if you don't, then it means that you have this very limited and at least limited concept of God. Even if it's not wrong, it's too limited to the point where you could say that it's wrong. And but it's funny because like when somebody says, "Oh, let me explain. I think, therefore I am," and if you think about what that really means, as I've said on here, before when I'm I talked about in my video, Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide, about what is the fundamental nature of reality and how you must think. And you have to think about how to think in order to actually think properly. You can't just look around and see things and have expectations, and if things don't meet your expectations, then it doesn't it's not going to jive with whatever the worldview it is that you have. That was so convoluted. But if you think about what it means, I think, therefore I am, you're basically saying that almost to exist means to think, which means fundamentally, if you really know what that means to think, like I said before, with processing information, you have to have someone to inform in order for the information to even exist. It means that existence, there's some steps between this, obviously, that you can break down, but existence must be sentient. Because you're basically saying that existence must be able to think, essentially, but you can get more fundamental than that. You can say existence must be able to feel, and means to feel. To exist means I am. Because if I don't exist, then if I am, then I exist. Okay? And that's much more firsthand understanding of existence than looking at like a light bulb and you're like, that light bulb exists. But you defined the light bulb. You defined the light bulb. It didn't define itself. You defined it. So you are more fundamental than that light bulb, or it must be assumed that that's the case. And that's the problem, is it's not assumed that that's the case anymore. I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and I just said something about, if you prioritize secondhand information above firsthand information, you've stopped thinking. This is the fundamental problem with everyone's thinking about everything these days, is they're not. They think that they are, but they've been tricked. It's so hard to even say they think that they are. They've been tricked into thinking that they're thinking. It's like they're trapped in this circuitous trap of referencing the wrong starting point. And so when you do that, you can't break out of it. So even if you sit there and you can try and explain, I think, therefore I am, if you really understand what that means, fundamentally, not just in terms of your own experience separate from everything else, but in terms of your own experience kind of being placed fundamentally to everything else, which it has to be, or else you are not starting from the right place, then you eventually end up with, okay, it means that existence is sentient. And isn't that God? And a lot of this, and this was part of my, I've talked on here before about, I've really wrestled with the idea of going back to school and getting like a master's or a PhD in philosophy. Because clout. I'm not gonna lie, that's really the reason. There's no other real reason. I mean, it would also help. There's benefits to it to some degree, but Alex O'Connor is one of like those people that he seems so genuine, and he has the talent, but he's also missing it, and I think missing the right foundation. And I think that part of it is because of the fact that he has a PhD or a master's or a PhD or whatever. He went to school for philosophy and theology, and that means you're taught what things mean instead of having to figure out what meaning even is, and starting from scratch and kind of having to like build in a much more, first principles type of way. And I was listening to him discuss, I think it was just, does God exist? And he was discussing it with some Muslim. I think his name is Muhammad Hijab, I think is his name. And I didn't listen to it all, but it was just such like an argument over, and part of it is the problem is just the debate format is just like everybody's trying to win and they're trying to play to the crowd. But another part of it was that they were just locked into terms instead of trying to like get on the same page and be like, okay, like this is what we mean by consciousness when we're going to use it in this discussion, right? We don't mean like you're awake and not asleep. We mean like your beingness, and when you don't do that, because you have all of these terms that are just clouding your ability to just get to the root of what you're trying to say, then you really get trapped. And I've seen this happen with philosophy, and this has happened in every single field, where all of a sudden there's like a billion different things, different types of philosophies. There's non-dualism and there's monism, and it's like, what's the difference between non-dualism and monism? And then there's phenomenalism, and there's idealism, and there's materialism, and it's like, what do these really mean? And you start from your camp. You're like, I'm an idealist. Well, you're an idealist? I'm an analytical idealist. Oh, you're an analytical idealist? I'm a phenomenalist. Oh, you're a phenomenalist? I'm a non-dualist. Oh, you're a non-dualist? I'm a theist. And it's like, what are we doing? Why don't we try and just discuss instead of being baked into these artificial camps that are kind of trapping? And I'm not saying that they're not helpful, because they can be, but only in the right context, like everything. And otherwise it just goes on and on and on. And like I've said before on here, I remember I was in this Discord discussion many years ago, and it was actually like a physics discussion to start, and it was Eric Goldstein was in there, and he was talking to a bunch of people about just his physics ideas and just the state of physics. And then he got off, and some people stayed, and late into that discussion ended at like really late at night, but then it continued on. And I remember there was this, one of the last people on there was like this philosophy professor, and I was just listening to him discuss with other people like what different aspects of philosophy. And eventually they were talking about Marx and Marxism, and he was just arguing against, I don't know, like Jordan Peterson or something, and they were like, oh, Marxism, a Marxist versus a neo-Marxist versus, and then the guy's saying, well, there's actually three Marxes, and eventually I just butted in, and I was like, what is philosophy? And he said, and I've said this before, if I could explain philosophy, because I said in a few sentences, what is philosophy? And he said, if I could explain philosophy in a few sentences, it wouldn't be philosophy. That just was like ridiculous to me, because that means like we're going in circles, and like it's mental masturbation. It's useless action it's taking energy. I'm not trying to be crude, but like that's just what it is. It's an activity but it doesn't have a goal. And and so, other than the activity itself, like that is the goal. And so that leads to nowhere. And so I this is one of the things I worry about. Like if I went, not worry about, I just think about, if I were to get a degree, how much risk is there in losing the ability or having it be harder to just stay grounded, because you just get locked into this like framework of what exists. And part of the problem with this also is that everybody has there's all these incentives, and everybody has, you know, various incentives. Everybody does. I do, you know, that are different. You know, I have the goal of truth with this, but I also, you know, enjoy it, and I also have a family to support. So like it'd be nice to, you know, find a way to support my family doing that which I think I'm, you know, most talented at. Everybody should try and do that. You know, think about what your talents are, and to use your talents as best you can. And so all of these things are various influences in everybody's life. And but the issue is that within the academia especially, and this isn't to rag on academia, it's just an observation and a recognition of some traps within the system. There are all these influences of all these different people who have, some of which have more pull within the establishment than others, can change the paradigm of how things are approached. And I see this in even reptiles. As many of you know, I study reptiles. And over the years, you know, there was like when I was younger, there was, this is like decades ago, there was species and then there was subspecies. There were like, you know, this subspecies. And so for instance, there's a species of lizard. It's the second largest lizard in the world. It's called a water monitor, an Asian water monitor. And its scientific name is Every0ne salvator. And it's from Indonesia, and there's anything from Indonesia has all these different variations because it's from all these different islands, and each island has different color ones, and that are basically the same animal, but it's just like this one's one color, this one's another color, this one's another color, this one's another color. And originally it was like Every0ne salvator, and it would be, you know, bivitatus or coming eye, or you know, whatever subspecies it was. And now it's just every single one is a different species. And the reason for this partially is because there's an incentive to have to name a new species. And you know, Eric Weinstein talks about this. And he says when there's nothing new to like discover that's being recognized by the group, it becomes like cannibalistic. I don't remember the words that he used. It wasn't that word, but it was not psychotic, but it's like I forgot what the term is that he used, but it's not a good term. it's like a term that means like psychotically cannibalistic in a way. And so when there's no new species to discover that are like really new species, like you're looking at it, you're like, that's not a different color water monitor. That's like a totally new, different species. Then all of a sudden everybody wants to like take what exists and rip a piece off. And I'm seeing this happens with physics, and it also happens with, you know, that's why there's different string theories. And it's like, well, why do we need different string theories? What is string theory at that point, you know? And so you see this with philosophy. Because what is the difference between idealism and analytic idealism and phenomenalism and non-dualism and monism? And it's like, what? And honestly, eventually, theism. And I like to use the term theism because to describe what is sentient singularity theory, my work. And it's it's basically all of these things that I just described, but it's also fundamentally, I like to think of it as theism because it's not just a framework of what is the nature of fundamental reality. It's what is the context of the structure of fundamental reality, which includes recognition of a hierarchy. Okay, because the hierarchy is your place in this structure. What is the structure? And you do that from a first person perspective by recognizing your place in a hierarchy. It means that there's a multi-level structure to this system, and the nature of it is sentience. So, sentient singularity theory is it's theism in the scientific. It's the scientific context of theism, or it's theism in a scientific context, or in a scientific language. But it's not scripture or one religion over the other, and there is no. It's not a religion. This is what I want to make clear for those who actually want to like understand it. And however people interpret it, people interpret things however they interpret them. But it's not a religion. There's no like prescription that comes from that there are implications about morality from sentient singularity theory, but that is not. There's no like specific prescription. For the most part, I would say, and any of the things that would be kind of almost specific are like universal, like marriage. It's like, that's not like this is like the way of marriage. It's like, has to be in this temple. Or it's like, no, that's a theological tradition, which people call religion. And those exist, and I'm not against any of them. I practice some of them. But and I study them, but it's not part of sentient singularity theory. But it is, in some ways supported by it. But it's I'm not going to lie about that. Truth is truth, people. But it doesn't support any specific singular religion. I will say that, like, if you want to judge something, and this isn't really like even from implicitly from sentient singularity theory, you should look at its fruit. Like, that's true of any religion. There's many religions that are real, across the world, and they each have their own contribution to make that are specific. And but this is sentient singularity theory is a separate thing. It's about the structure of existence and of the cosmos and our kind of place in it, but it's not about specific ritual. There's no ritual that comes from sentient singularity theory. So I don't want, just when I say it's theism, doesn't mean that it is a religion. It's not. There is no, you can go to religions for religion, but, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't, I do, but that is, a personal path that people have to take. It's not like it comes that my work implies, that there's one path. And there's many people in the world for a reason, because like there's lots of information that God has to convey to the world and can't do it through one person alone, at least right now, we'll say. And so but it is theism, I would say, is like the most accurate way of describing it. And but that has implications about like what happens after you die. That's not religion, though. That's description of what logically seems like could happen after you die. It's not even saying that this is what will happen to you. I don't know. Because ultimately, if sentience is fundamental, that means choice is fundamental. And it lies with God, ultimately. And so, like, he can make a choice. That's implied. And what he chooses for each of us is whatever he chooses for each of us. And so I can't tell you what will happen to you or what will happen to me after, our physical body is no longer inhabited, permanently no longer inhabited by our beingness. But sentient singularity theory would have implications about what could happen, and potentialities. And there's really only two, which is like you don't exist anymore, which there's like almost implies that you didn't already, and which meant that there is no you even at that point. You like a corrupted file. There is no information anymore. Or you persist. And it's like, that seems to be the default, or because it seems like it would be the goal. You got to think about goals if sentience is fundamental. And this is where science has kind of like missed the boat, including philosophy. Is like, if it's, you can't think about the cosmos and the path of humanity and the path of existence and evolution without thinking about intentions. And we have lost thinking about intentions, so we are totally lost. And just interesting to see how we get to that point. But that same kind of phenomenon happens with like every subject. It becomes pathological. That's the term that Eric Weinstein uses. All these things become pathological, these fields. Let's look that up, pathological. What does that mean? Pathological, relating to pathology. That's so not the definition, but involving, caused by, or of the nature of a physical or mental disease. Compulsive, obsessive. So basically it means like similar to compulsive, obsessive, inveterate, habitual, persistent, chronic, diseased, morbid. It means like incoherent. It seems like it's like without goal. Without goals, without intentions. It seems. And that's a great definition, or it's a great term for what happens in these fields that Eric was using. I didn't realize how good of a term that was. Adjective. You describe a person or their behavior as pathological when they behave in an extreme and unacceptable way, and they have very powerful feelings that they cannot control. So it means like uncontrolled, which means like incoherent, really, and without a goal. Kind of like the best way I think to put it. And I think philosophy has become pathological. And I don't really know how much I want to study in a pathological institution, a field that's gone pathological. And I see things being rebuilt, outside of it. I see, these YouTube channels that I discuss and these people that I discuss who are linked to the institution, some of them, who talk about, consciousness as being fundamental, which means like beingness, which is, people say being means having the experience of being, or it just means being sentient. It means feeling. And, but we just, it's tough for us to describe things. And like I said, I think that's because the fields have gone pathological, which means that their terminology has gone pathological. Everybody wants a piece of everything. And instead of just having the goal of making sense, it's not that difficult. Sometimes it is, but it's more that we're starting from a context that is confused. And so to move from a confused context to a not so confused context is a little difficult because you have to like reorganize things that have gone disorganized first. That's tough. I sent an interesting study to the Discord, Intelligent Plasma Life Forms. Yeah, I saw that actually. I didn't read it but I was reading a little bit of what you had said about it. And, got me thinking a bit. But, plasma is something that's interesting. It's like more animated. It's a more animated form of matter than just like a gas. It has directionality to it because it has like charge. And so while I don't think that it is like a life form, not saying that at a fundamental level there isn't that there of like a, molecule being a being, but whereas like a flame I don't think is really a life form, but it might be like a corporism, as I've said before, which is like you can cut it in half a bunch of times and it's like a corporation. And that might be true of like plasma bubbles, on a cosmological scale. Alex O'Connor. Yeah, Alex O'Connor. Yeah, we're going to talk about some of his videos in the coming weeks because he's very, very talented. Like, one of the most philosophically talented people I've ever seen. Like, ever. And just missing the mark a little bit on the fundamentals, and that throws off everything. But at the same time, seems to be very genuine in his goals. And you have to deal with people like that. Last week I talked about... or not last week, the week before, I talked about, Dave, from Professor Dave Explains, and there's just, I'm not saying that his intentions aren't true, because in his discussions, I think that they're in many ways much more true, but, like I mostly see him on Twitter, and that's a different thing, but, it's just important to, like a couple times, like I did engage with him once on Twitter. I said one thing to him. I don't remember what it was. And he responded, and it was like very uneventful. But I almost respond so many times where I start typing a response to him, and I realize like his response to something isn't true, and then my response to his response is kind of thrown off by that. So before I hit post, like I just delete it. And I can't tell you how many times I've typed out a response to his responses that I see on Twitter and then not hit post and just deleted it. Countless times, guys. Countless times. But you have to just deal with people in a context in which you believe they're being true. None of us are true all the time. But we have to try and maximize the amount of instances in which we are true. True to the stated intentions. Or true to the expected intentions. And so yeah, I think Alex O'Connor does that quite a bit, at least, and more than most people in his position, and I appreciate that. But I will say, like, there is something trapping about the formal education, the formal framework of every field today, including philosophy. It is trapping because it is so pathological. There's so many different branches that are essentially saying the same thing, and I will say they're starting to communicate, and I'm seeing that in these these theolocutions that and things like that Kirchheim Mungel from the Theories of Everything channel put on, and others with similar focuses, and that's great to see. It really is, because we need that. We need discussions instead of debates, where people can be much more easily, true to a goal. It's just important. Hey Louie, how's it going? What do you guys think of some health essentials? Like I think that I don't know. I think it's just important to be intentional with what you put in your body as much as possible. I'm not saying I always am. I'm definitely not. Guys, I love milkshakes. Not gonna lie, it's just my weakness for sure. But I try and be healthier about which ones lately, but not always. So I don't know if I'm the best person to ask that, but um, it's having a daughter though. Recently, I will say, like, I'm not going to get too into it right now because it's just personal, but like you now, when you have a child, there's a lot of health decisions that you have to make of, you know, what what drugs are you going to give them? What treatments are they going to get? What vaccines are they going to get? What kind of formula are they going to eat? Or are you going to breastfeed, or are you going to feed them only whole foods when they get older, or are you going to let them eat fast food? It's like all these decisions, and it does make me much more conscious of like these types of things. But I don't have any like specifics to give. I just will say that try and be intentional as much as possible, but sometimes that's hard because I come home from work or something and it's like, well, let's just order Shake Shack. No, I'm not gonna lie, I've done that many times. So I don't have any specifics like cleanses or anything to recommend. Quran mentions a lot of true insights as well, much like that. Yeah, the Quran has many insights, and I mean I'm fascinated by the Quran. I think it's demonized, but so is all scripture, But the Quran, especially today in today's times, in our part of the world, it is especially demonized. But there's so much truth in the Quran. Absolutely, there's so much truth in the Quran. I think it is true scripture, for sure. Wouldn't God's guidance be the guidance? Yes. For an efficient approach of quality of life. Back to the monologue. There we are, back to the monologue. I don't know what you mean. Okay. Messenger. Everybody is a messenger of God. That's definitely true. But you have to try and maximize the amount of messages that you send from that being versus other beings that are also in existence. Yeah, it makes you think about dreams quite a bit. And but anyways, one who is watching, please hit the like button if you have found this interesting. Comment any questions that you would like me to answer before we wrap up in the chat, and I will get to them a bit. I think this is going to be kind of a shorter one though tonight, and I just kind of wanted to talk a bit about those observations that I had about dreams and consciousness, and what that implies about life and death. But we need to really work on our definitions. Like, what does life mean? And it's like one of those things like consciousness. It's like really a destructive term a lot of times to our discussions, because to be alive versus to not, and when you get to a fundament, there's a difference between a fundamental level and a non-fundamental level. And that's kind of the problem, because if life is sentience, which is really what it should mean fundamentally, which means like you don't need the term life, then it always exists. So it's like there's never not life. It's just where is it? Where is it in the specific place that you're looking? How is it manifesting? Not does it exist or not? Of course it exists. It's just where. Because it always exists. That means like the question is, what's the structure that is having a singular sentience manifesting? What structure is that in the specific place that you're looking? Is this sentient, this letter opener, or is the molecules in it sentient? and or is it the atoms, or is it both, or is your hand sentient, or is it your the totality of your being that is sentient, and is it your cells that are sentient? And it's both your cells and your beingness, and but your sentience still exists even after, at least the default is for it to continue to exist even after you die. And but it's like death. That means death is an emergent term that doesn't really make sense on a fundamental level for the most part. I'm not saying it couldn't. It just means it's a different thing. Death almost means like deletion on a fundamental level, which is just like absence after that. It's not a thing. It's nothing, which is, you can't even talk about on a fundamental level without confusing everything. So, it's funny. I listened to this comedian. I shared it on Facebook, and on not Facebook, Instagram. Follow me on Instagram, at Theory of Everyone or Tyler Marshall Goldstein, and send me a private message on there if you want to join our Discord community. But I post, things on there. I need to post more on the Theory of Everyone, but like I said, to those of you who have not normally here, I recently had a child, and even last week had a death in the family, and like it's just been a crazy time. Mostly good, even, like death is not a bad thing. It can be a sad thing, and it is often a very sad thing, but it's not a bad thing usually. And I would say, or like it doesn't have to be, is what I'll say. And you're here to be alive in an emergent sense. Like you're here to change things and influence the world and have an impact. That's why you were made. But you're also eventually have to be saved and have to, stop changing things and let someone else, take on that responsibility. And I was just thinking about my grandmother, and my grandpa died when I was very young. I was like, not very, very young, but I was like 10 or 11, I think. And he passed away. And it is very interesting because he was losing the ability to like think. He had he hit his head when he was much younger. He like fell and hit his head, and he had scar tissue that formed in his brain and a tumor that formed on scar tissue, and in much later in life. And but it was all caused by this injury, and decades and decades earlier. And he kind of lost the ability to make sense of the world in some ways. Like he kept thinking that my dad was my uncle. I remember that when I was a kid, and that information is all there. It's just there's something about like the brain being the physical manifestation of like the knot of entanglement of connections, essentially, that is getting screwed up. So I'm not saying physicality doesn't matter, but it's not fundamental. But it is emergent. It does exist. Materialism does exist. It's just not fundamental. And so I wondered, a lot about like, as soon as he passed, probably was able to access everything, after that, and not have mismatched connections. And I remember I wrote him a letter, and my dad had sent me this letter like recently, right after my grandmother had died. They found the letter that I wrote when I was like 11 or something, and it was like, eventually, I will see you again in heaven, to my grandpa. And like it made me think about my grandma, who's like been without her husband in this world for decades at this point, multiple decades, and now is I assume, that the two of them are together, and I do assume that, and that is, like they feel that. I believe that. And so while it is like it's like a bittersweet thing, death, you are no longer here, but in some ways it's also, not going to lie, there's a relieving aspect to death when you're very old or when you're very sick. And there's some relief associated with it, because now you're no longer trapped by the, decay of your materialistic, cage, I guess, or not necessarily cage, but your medium. And but then at the same time, like, you get to be aware of what is beyond. Everything makes much more sense after you pass, I would imagine, for most people, because you see from God's perspective, much more so. And you also get to be with loved ones lost, especially when you're old and you've lost your spouse. It's for the best, even though it is sad for us, but it's also a wonderful thing probably to you. Is like, you truly get to rest, and not just rest, but rest and watch. In however it is that you watch, through feeling, probably. You feel like, I think loved ones feel our trials and our joy and everything still when they pass. But they also perceive and feel the plan beyond that we can't see, So they know the goodness that eventually comes, whether that is in life or in death. And it's just something to remember. I think it's important. Let me see this. That's an awesome letter opener, by the way. Well done. Thank you. Yeah, it was very fun. Like I said, I recommend trying blacksmithing. It is very cool. I want to try other things. Are you trying to convert Tyler to Islam? Every Muslim I know is trying to convert me to Islam. And I will just say this, like, I believe that there is no God but one God, and that Muhammad was a prophet. So, like, I don't know what that means, but I've never walked into a mosque and officially converted, but I don't disbelieve in Islam. I believe that Islam is a true theological tradition. So I don't know what else there really is to convert me to. I believe in the morals of Islam, but they're the same morals as Judaism. And Christianity. I think morals are morals. Like, you read the Christian Bible, it says the exact same things as Islam. There's no real incoherence in moral prescriptions between Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. That doesn't mean that there aren't misinterpretations made by humans at some point in various hadiths or in, certain Talmudic verses and things like that. Of course there are. But Talmudic records, not verses, but records. But there is ultimately a single, moral prescription for all of them, found within all of them. And I think that any true theological tradition will have basically fundamentally the same moral prescriptions. You can see that. That's one of the ways, like I said, judge something by its fruit. Does something encourage, monogamous marriages and families and children and modesty and beauty and truth, or does something encourage not that. Things that are not that. And so, I'm not... I don't know what else to say about it, but there's so much truth. I mean, not in all three Abrahamic traditions. I study, regularly all three Abrahamic traditions. And I think that each one of them has a specific... They have the same exact, fundamental truths, but they also have a specific lesson to teach. And you can see that in the definition of each one. What does it mean to be a Muslim? You don't look at, like, what's the difference between Christianity and Islam and Judaism. You look at what is the difference between a Muslim, a Jew, and a Christian. And, like, then you can see it, where, like, a Muslim is a way of life in submission to God. And then Judaism is a people. It is a community. So it's like Islam is a culture. Judaism is a community, or what? Not Judaism, but Jewishness is a community. Judaism is basically just Islam. And then plus a few extra steps. But and then Christianity is a cornerstone belief. It's like fundamentally a Christian is defined by them having a specific cornerstone belief. A Jew is defined by them being part of a specific community, and a Muslim is someone who pursues a specific culture in submission to God. And these are lessons to teach us that until what religions would describe, or the Abrahamic religions would describe as the Messianic era, they are not going to manifest in a singular movement. They are going to manifest in multiple movements, these lessons. But eventually that won't be the case, but that's up to God when that happens. And but yeah, I mean, I have friends who are Muslim. He already admitted that it's true. The Quran, yeah, I admit that the truth is, the Quran is true scripture. So is the Bible. Everything is true. I don't know if that, how true that is. But everything that fundamentally exists is true, but like there are things that emergently exist that ultimately are not fundamentally true. Yeah, we can't be vague that way. Also makes a big difference. We must talk as well as we listen. Yes, that's true. Anyways, well, thank you, everybody. Please hit the like button if you found this interesting or you found it valuable. Please share it. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. We are almost at, I think, 2K. I don't really pay much attention to it, but I saw we were almost at the next level, whatever that is. What is it? Yeah, 2K. We're almost at 2K. Big plans for this year. I know that the schedule has been a bit wonky, but that doesn't mean that we're slowing down. So thank you, everybody. And, see you next week. Peace.